And action! Jen had a question about fasting. And I did have a fasting video from before, DrRic question fasting. But we'll get into more details with this one. Because she had some ideas about fasting, but wanted to know which kind of fasting diet would apply to her. So the bottom line with fasting is that when you have energy or need to do something and the cells in your body have to have some form of energy, then it can either use carbohydrates, a really good way to burn up carbohydrates as a fuel source, or it can use fats, really good way to do that too. It can sometimes use proteins, but that's usually last-ditch effort. So carbohydrates or fats, we'll talk about that. We are such a carbohydrate-dominant society that we're always exposing and filling our bodies with carbohydrate. And there's nothing wrong with that when you look at what the macronutrients are. They're either fats, proteins, or carbohydrates. And that's it. That's the only macronutrient you have. So if the body is really good at digesting these two ways, maybe not so bad at digesting the protein way, then you have your options. The problem is we got this plethora of all the carbohydrates in our fast foods, in our coffee, in our drinks, in everything. So if we're constantly exposing our bodies and our mouths to heavy carbohydrate, then what are you going to need to put that carbohydrate out of the stomach into the blood and then into the cell? You'll need insulin. And insulin has its things that it saves us from, but it also has its problems. If you constantly hit your body with carbohydrate, then your body is going to secrete insulin, insulin, insulin. And insulin makes you store. It's supposed to do that. It's supposed to make you store energy in the battery. And the battery is going to be here, usually in the visceral fat. That apron that's inside the belly that gets fatter and fatter and fatter, that's why your tummy gets big. It gets there. Then eventually it gets to the subcutaneous fat. But our biggest problem is usually this girth that we have when we get obese, and that usually leads us to metabolic syndrome. Triglyceride, HDL, waistline, high blood pressure. So all these things will put us down the road of high blood pressure, diabetes, heart disease, stroke, cancer. So one of the options is, instead of using carbohydrate as a fuel source, try to use fat as your fuel source. But here's the thing. You can't get all this fat that you stored to liberate and utilize as fuel unless you have no insulin around. Because if you have insulin around, it's a one-way ticket to go into the fat cells. It cannot come out. If you don't have insulin around and you have the opposite, lipase around, then actually you can liberate the fat sources from the visceral fat. And that's the basics of fasting. If you want to burn up all that crap that's on the inside, visceral fat, and you want to change your fuel source, you have to kind of decrease the amount of times you get exposed to heavy carbohydrate. So if you can go more fat, a little less carbohydrate, more protein, that'd be perfect. Everybody talks about high protein nowadays, but usually nobody talks about decreasing the episodes of feeding. So there's a couple things with intermittent. So that's the basics of fasting, the benefits of fasting. I'll talk about more benefits later on. But so the ideas about different forms of fasting, we'll just talk about, say, 5-2. 5-2 is a common one. Usually that means exactly what it sounds like. 5 days you're eating normally, hopefully not crappy, but normal diet, and try to make it not more than 2,000 calories a day. And then on 2 days you go lean. Lean being about 400, depending on your body weight, 400 to 600 calories per day. So if you do that on the 2 days, your body goes through starvation. When it goes through starvation, it lowers the insulin level, it increases lipase level. So it starts to go into ketogenesis. And when it goes into ketogenesis, like a ketogenic diet, during those 2 days, usually the body changes around its mechanics. It converts over from like an electric car, it stops the fuel, the gasoline goes to electricity. But it goes to one or the other. You can't do both. So that's what you do during the 2 days. Some people will do an alternate day fast where they go lean on one day, 600 calories, and they go normal on the next day. Lean on one day, normal on the next day. So when you have a family, that's a little tough. Sometimes it's, for me, that would be tough. Especially with different days at the clinic, off days, on days, parties, family time. So that could be a problem, but that's another way. Lean gains is also another one where you go 16-8 or 16-7, again, normal, and then lean. So the bottom line with any of those things, or you can go intermittent to the point of 16 hours of fast, meaning from nothing from dinner time till 14 or 16 hours later, which is a lot of time. That's usually just enough time for one meal a day. That's kind of tough. And to do that indefinitely, I don't know that that's that healthy. And the studies, we have to see what it shows, but I would not ever do that indefinitely. You have to be careful. The body can have its benefits, but it can also have its downsides with regards to giving it a taste of starvation. So that's why, as I mentioned in a ketogenic diet in the past, I don't know that it's the safest thing to do. Some people will swear by it and do great with it. Some kids with seizures, intractable seizures, will benefit from it, but indefinitely is probably not the healthiest thing. And it might change mood, it might turn on inflammation later on, and again, that's not good. Which, hopefully that's a little bit of an intro on how to start with an intermittent fast. The next thing, and the biggest thing, which is great information now, is from Walter Longo out of California. He's come up with FMD, or fasting mimicking diet. And his information is really good. I have my book coming from Amazon, but the information he has is to try 5 days of lowering your calorie sources and then 25 days of what he calls refeeding. So what he found was that he was doing experiments with cancer patients, and it sounds like none of the doctors and none of the patients wanted to do decrease calorie intakes forever. So it was a tough sell to get the studies going. Then he came up with the idea about, well, let's do a 5-day and then see what happens. And that's an easier sell to get a study population going. I think he got 18 patients to do it. And he found during the 5 days, they tolerated 1,000 calorie day restriction. And that's less protein, more fats, less carbohydrates. And then 4 days of about a 700 calorie day restriction. Still low proteins and equal fats and carbohydrates. And then after that, what he called the refueling source. So it was the signal that was sent during the 5 days to the body that it's starvation. And during the starvation times, you'd have this clearing of old cells. The body would get tuned up. His theory is that during starvation, animals protect themselves to weather, to inclement weather, inclement environment, to low calorie sources, and hoping that when the food comes back into the environment, the animal will unprotect itself and kind of liberate. So that 5 days of fast or starvation actually turned on the cells to work better, especially when you signaled to them that there's something going on and they started to improve or clear out the bad cells and build up some good cells. During the refeeding phase, those good cells that got turned on, and those are stem cells. And these are studies with small pilot study, animal studies, but stem cells got turned on, and during the refeeding phase, those stem cells really reproduced really good cells. Stem cells are those little cells that are responsible for making the basic building blocks, T lymphocytes. And if you can turn on a new stem cell, it'll make pure T lymphocytes, maybe B cells as well, and you'll have a better functioning system. The problem when you have inflammation is, or multiple sclerosis, or cancer, or anything like Hashimoto's, autoimmune disease, is that sometimes those T cells go a little crazy. Because of inflammation, supposedly, the T cells go wrong and they start attacking the cell. Attacking this, attacking the brain in Hashimoto's, attacking the brain in multiple sclerosis, attacking the joints in rheumatoid arthritis, attacking the colon in Crohn's disease. So we give medicines to knock down the immune system. Very powerful medicines. Sometimes the protocols work nicely, sometimes the protocols damage the human more than the cell. So what Longo has found is that you don't need medicines. He can actually start the stem cell reproduction of T cells with that 5-day fast, or the FMD. So that fasting mimicking diet does seem to work. There are human studies that are going on now. I think he just released information, or is going to release information to the FDA on multiple sclerosis patients, and I have a feeling that he had positive results. So the bottom line with that is that with fasting, whether you do FMD or whether you do the other intermittent fast like I mentioned, the short run idea is to get the fat mobilized out of those tough to get cells in the visceral apron. If you can get that out, number one, you'll lose weight. Number two, you'll digest better. Number three, you won't necessarily feel so starved if you do intermittent type fasting. If you look at Longo's information, you'll also be able to turn around autoimmunity. So there are benefits all around. And again, it does take a little bit of coaching. So you have to find either a doctor or a nutritionist, registered dietitian that's well versed with this, because you can't just go lean on those days but choose bad foods to go lean. You still have to know what to choose, how to cook, what to use when you refeed. Now, only with Victor Longo, with Longo's information did he mention about the importance of refeeding. So in the intermittent type fasting, there's no mention about what to do during those days that you get back to regular eating. But again, it's usually going to be sticking to a whole food, mostly plant-based diet, decreasing your alcohol, decreasing your caffeine intake, staying away from processed sugar, staying away from fructose, staying away from foods that you have allergies to. So all those still are in play. It's not just cutting down calories and just doing that.